What if I told you that the person who betrayed me the most wasn't just my wife? What if I told you she chose my own brother? And what if I told you that the woman who saved me from losing everything is now the love of my life? This isn't a movie. This is my life. And if you think you've heard betrayal stories before, trust me, you haven't heard anything like this. Stay with me, because what happened in that courtroom will blow your mind. But first, let me take you back to where it all began. My name is Michael, and 3 years ago, I thought I had it all figured out. I was 32 years old, running a successful software consulting business that I'd built from the ground up. I had a beautiful home in the suburbs, a luxury car in the driveway, and a wife who I believed was my soulmate. Her name was Jessica. We'd been married for 6 years, together for 8. She had this infectious laugh, the kind that would make everyone in the room turn and smile. She was charming, beautiful, and everyone loved her. My friends loved her. My family loved her. Especially my brother. My brother, David, was 2 years younger than me. Growing up, we were inseparable. We played on the same sports teams, went to the same college, and even worked together for a few years before I started my own company. David was the kind of guy who could walk into a room and make friends instantly. Charismatic, funny, the life of every party. He was also my best man at my wedding. Looking back now, I can see all the red flags I missed. But when you trust someone, really trust them, you don't look for signs. You don't question the late-night texts. You don't wonder why your wife suddenly started going to the gym 5 times a week. You don't think twice when your brother starts showing up at your house more often, even when you're not home. You just trust. And that trust? It's the most dangerous thing you can give to the wrong person. Everything started unraveling on a random Tuesday evening in March. I remember the date exactly, March 15th. I'd come home earlier from a client meeting that got canceled. Usually, I'd text Jessica to let her know I was coming home, but my phone had died in the car. I pulled into the driveway around 4 in the afternoon. Jessica's car was there, which was normal, but what wasn't normal was the black Mercedes parked behind it. My brother's Mercedes. Now, this shouldn't have been strange, right? David visited all the time. But something in my gut twisted. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was all those little things I'd been subconsciously noticing finally breaking through the surface. I walked into my house, through the front door, my own house with my own keys, and I heard laughter coming from upstairs. Jessica's laughter, and David's voice, coming from my bedroom. Have you ever had that moment where time just stops? Where your brain knows what's happening, but your heart is screaming at you that you're wrong, that you're crazy, that there's a perfectly innocent explanation? I stood at the bottom of those stairs for what felt like an eternity. It was probably only 10 seconds. And then I climbed those stairs, each step feeling like I was walking toward the end of my entire world. The bedroom door was slightly open. I'm not going to give you all the graphic details. This isn't that kind of story. But what I saw through that crack in the door confirmed every nightmare I didn't even know I had. My wife, my brother, in my bed, in my home. I didn't burst through the door screaming. I didn't make a scene. I just stood there, pulled out my phone, opened the camera app, and took a video. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone steady, but I got enough. Trust me, I got more than enough. Then I walked back downstairs, got in my car, and drove. I don't even remember where I went. I just drove for hours, my mind completely blank, until I found myself parked outside a 24-hour diner at almost midnight. I sat in that parking lot and finally let myself feel it. The betrayal, the anger, the complete devastation of realizing that the 2 people I trusted most in this world had destroyed me together. But here's the thing about hitting rock bottom. Sometimes, it's exactly where you need to be to start building something better. I didn't go home that night. I checked into a hotel and barely slept. The next morning, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I needed a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. I needed the best. I asked around, made some calls to business contacts, and one name kept coming up over and over. Sarah Mitchell. Sarah Mitchell was a legend in family law. People called her the Shark because once she took your case, she didn't just win, she obliterated the opposition. She had a 97% success rate in divorce cases, and she was known for being absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting her clients. She was also notoriously selective about which cases she took. I called her office that morning and, surprisingly, got an appointment for that same afternoon. Apparently, there'd been a cancellation. Looking back now, I think the universe was finally throwing me a bone. When I walked into her office, I didn't know what to expect. Based on her reputation, I figured she'd be this intimidating, cold, sharp-dressed woman who would shake my hand with a grip that could crush stone. But Sarah Mitchell wasn't what I expected at all. She was 34, with dark brown hair pulled back in a professional ponytail, intelligent hazel eyes, and a presence that was commanding without being cold. She wore a navy blue suit that was all business, but when she smiled at me, a warm, genuine smile, I felt some of the weight lift off my chest for the first time in 24 hours. "Mr. Peterson," she said, extending her hand, "I'm Sarah Mitchell. Please, have a seat." Her handshake was firm, but not aggressive, professional. I sat down across from her at a massive oak desk covered in legal files and 3 computer monitors. Her office was impressive. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, law degrees from Harvard on the wall, and shelves filled with legal books and case files. "So," she said, folding her hands on the desk and giving me her complete attention, "tell me everything." And I did. I told her about finding Jessica and David together, about the video I'd taken, about the 6 years of marriage, the business I'd built, the house we owned together, the joint bank accounts, everything. Sarah listened without interrupting, occasionally taking notes on a legal pad. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and I could practically see her brilliant legal mind working through every angle. Then she looked up at me, and her eyes had changed. They were harder now, determined. "Michael," she said, "I'm going to be straight with you. Your wife is going to try to take you for everything you've got. In affairs like this, especially when there are significant assets involved, the unfaithful spouse often becomes aggressive in divorce proceedings. They feel guilty, so they overcompensate by trying to paint themselves as the victim." My stomach dropped. "So I'm going to lose everything?" Sarah's lips curved into a small, almost predatory smile. "I didn't say that. I said she's going to try. But here's what's actually going to happen. We're going to make absolutely certain that her betrayal costs her dearly. That video you took? That's gold. Plus, I'm going to need you to document everything, every asset, every account, every piece of property. We're going to build a case so airtight that she won't have a leg to stand on." "Can you do that?" I asked. "Mr. Peterson, I don't take cases I can't win, and I never lose." She leaned forward slightly. "But I need you to trust me completely. Can you do that?" For the first time since my world fell apart, I felt something other than despair. I felt hope. "Yes," I said, "I can do that." "Good." She stood up and extended her hand again. "Then let's destroy her case and make sure justice is served." Over the next few weeks, Sarah became more than just my lawyer. She became my lifeline. While I was struggling to function, moving out of my house into a temporary apartment, trying to focus on my business, dealing with the emotional devastation, Sarah was building our case like a master architect. She was meticulous. She dug into every financial record, every asset, every detail of my marriage. She hired a forensic accountant to make sure Jessica hadn't been hiding money. She interviewed potential witnesses. She prepared for every possible argument Jessica's lawyer might make. And through it all, she was kind to me. I remember one evening, about 3 weeks into the process, I was in her office going over some financial documents. It was late, almost 8 in the evening, and I just broke down. The stress, the betrayal, the exhaustion,
It all hit me at once. I expected Sarah to be uncomfortable, to maybe awkwardly hand me a tissue and change the subject, but instead she came around the desk, pulled up a chair next to me, and just sat there. She didn't tell me to pull myself together. She didn't give me empty platitudes. She just sat with me until I could breathe again. "Michael, what happened to you was cruel and unfair. You have every right to feel devastated. But I need you to hear this. You are not weak for feeling this way. You're human, and being human means feeling pain when the people we love hurt us." I looked at her, and for the first time, I saw past her professional lawyer exterior. I saw someone who genuinely cared. "Thank you," I managed to say, "for everything." She smiled. "That's what I'm here for. Now let's get back to work, because the best revenge isn't getting mad, it's winning so thoroughly that they regret ever crossing you." And God, did we win.
Jessica hired a lawyer named Robert Chen. He was good, aggressive, well-known, expensive, but he wasn't Sarah. The divorce proceedings started about 2 months after I filed. Jessica's strategy became clear immediately. She was going to play the victim. Her lawyer claimed that I was controlling, that I had been emotionally absent during the marriage, that I had prioritized my business over her needs. They even tried to argue that my unexpected arrival home that day had been a violation of her privacy and that the video I'd taken was inadmissible. Sarah destroyed every single argument. In the first hearing, when Chen tried to claim the video was obtained illegally, Sarah calmly explained to the judge that I had every legal right to record video in my own home on my own property. The video stood. When they tried to paint me as an absent husband, Sarah brought in testimony from my business partners, employees, and friends, all testifying that I had always maintained a healthy work-life balance and that I'd frequently left work early or worked from home to spend time with Jessica. When they tried to claim I was controlling, Sarah produced Jessica's bank statements showing that she'd had complete access to our joint accounts and had spent freely on whatever she wanted, including, notably, several expensive gifts for my brother that we later discovered. That detail came out during one of the depositions, and I'll never forget the look on Jessica's face when Sarah calmly presented the credit card statements showing a $1,500 watch Jessica had purchased for David for his birthday, charged to our joint account. "Mrs. Peterson," Sarah had said, her voice perfectly calm, "can you explain why you spent $1,500 of marital funds on a gift for your brother-in-law while your husband received a $50 gift card for his birthday the same year?" Jessica had stammered, turned red, and her lawyer had objected, but the damage was done. But the real turning point came when we had to address the division of assets. My business was the major point of contention. I had started it 2 years before Jessica and I got married, but it had grown significantly during our marriage. Jessica's lawyer argued that she was entitled to half of the business's value because it had grown during the marriage and she had supported me during that growth. Sarah had been preparing for this argument for weeks. "Your Honor," she said during the hearing, standing up with a thick folder of documents, "I'd like to submit evidence regarding Mrs. Peterson's actual contribution to the growth of Mr. Peterson's business." She proceeded to show that not only had Jessica not contributed to the business, but she had actively taken money from it for personal expenses. Sarah had documentation showing that Jessica had withdrawn over $100,000 from the business account over the years for personal shopping, spa treatments, and luxury vacations, expenses that had nothing to do with the business and which I had allowed because at the time I trusted her and wanted her to be happy. "Furthermore," Sarah continued, "I have testimony from Mr. Peterson's business partners and employees that Mrs. Peterson was rarely, if ever, involved in the business operations. She attended 2 company events in 6 years. She never provided advice, labor, or any material contribution to the company's success." Sarah then turned to me. "Mr. Peterson, in your own words, did your wife support the growth of your business?" I looked at Jessica,
who was staring daggers at me, and said honestly, "No, I built that business myself, with my team. Jessica was never involved." The judge was clearly not impressed with Jessica's claims. Then came the bombshell. Sarah had discovered, through her forensic accountant, that Jessica and David had been planning their affair for over a year. She found hotel receipts, restaurant charges, even texts that Jessica had failed to delete from an old iPad that she'd left behind at the house. In one particularly damning exchange, from 6 months before I caught them, Jessica had texted David, "Just a little longer and we can be together. Once the business hits the next milestone, I'll make sure I get half in the divorce. We'll be set for life." When Sarah read that text aloud in court, the room went completely silent. Jessica's face went white. David, who had been called as a witness, looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor, and Jessica's lawyer looked like he'd just been hit by a truck. "Your Honor," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade, "this text message clearly demonstrates that Mrs. Peterson engaged in adultery with premeditation and with the specific intent to defraud my client of his marital assets. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. This was calculated, deliberate betrayal with financial motivation." The judge looked at Jessica with barely concealed disgust. "Mrs. Peterson, do you deny sending this message?" Jessica tried to speak, but no words came out. Her lawyer whispered something to her, and she finally managed, I was emotional. I didn't mean—" "Answer the question," the judge said coldly. "Did you send this message?" "Yes," she whispered. "And did you engage in an extramarital affair with the intent to financially benefit from the subsequent divorce?" Jessica's lawyer tried to object, but the judge cut him off. "Your client will answer the question." Jessica looked defeated. "Yes." From that moment, the case was over. The final judgment came down 2 weeks later. Not only did Jessica get absolutely nothing from my business, but because of her adultery and premeditated fraud, she was also ordered to pay me back a significant portion of the money she'd withdrawn from the business account. The house went to me. The cars went to me. Even her request for alimony was denied because of the adultery clause in our prenup, something Sarah had caught that Jessica's lawyer had somehow missed. Jessica walked away from our 6-year marriage with only her personal belongings and a massive legal bill from her lawyer. Sarah had absolutely destroyed her case. When we left the courthouse after the final judgment, I felt like I could finally breathe again. The nightmare was over. Justice had been served. Sarah walked beside me down the courthouse steps, carrying her briefcase, looking as composed and professional as always. "Sarah," I said, stopping on the steps, "I don't even know how to thank you. You saved my life." She smiled, and there was something different in her eyes. Something warm. "You deserved justice, Michael. I'm just glad I could help you get it." We stood there for a moment, and I realized something that had been building for weeks without me fully acknowledging it. I had feelings for Sarah. Real feelings. But she was my lawyer. It would be inappropriate, unprofessional. I pushed the thought away. "I guess this is it. Case closed." Case closed. We shook hands, and I walked away, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in my chest that I was losing more than just my lawyer.
3 weeks passed after the divorce was finalized. I tried to move on with my life. I focused on my business, which was thriving. I moved back into my house and started redecorating, getting rid of everything that reminded me of Jessica. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected during the marriage and the divorce proceedings, but I couldn't stop thinking about Sarah. I told myself it was just gratitude. She'd saved me from financial ruin and had been incredibly kind during the worst period of my life. Of course I felt attached to her. It was perfectly normal. Except it didn't feel like gratitude. It felt like something more. I was sitting in my home office on a Friday evening, trying to work, but mostly just staring at my computer screen, when my phone rang. It was Sarah.
My heart immediately started racing, which was ridiculous. She was probably just calling about some final paperwork or a remaining legal detail. "Hello?" I answered. "Michael, hi." Her voice sounded different, less formal, almost nervous, which was completely unlike her. "I hope I'm not calling it a bad time." "No, not at all. Is everything okay? Is there a problem with the case?" "No, everything's fine with the case. That's all completely settled." She paused. "Actually, I'm calling about something else. Something personal." My mouth went dry. "Okay." "I know this is highly unusual, and I want you to know that I've never done anything like this before in my entire career. In fact, I've spent the last 3 weeks talking myself out of making this call." "Sarah, what is it?" Another pause. Then, "Would you like to have dinner with me? Not as a client, not as a lawyer, just as two people." I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, completely stunned. "Sarah, are you still there?" "Yes," I said quickly. "Yes, I'm here. Are you asking me out on a date?" "She am," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice now. "And before you say anything, I want you to know that I'm fully aware this is complicated. You were my client. There are ethical considerations. But you're not my client anymore, and I—" She trailed off, then continued more quietly. "I can't stop thinking about you." My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. "Sarah, I've been thinking about you too, for weeks, but I thought it would be inappropriate, or that you wouldn't be interested, or—" "Well, I am interested, very interested. So what do you say? Dinner?" I couldn't help but smile. "Yes, absolutely yes." We agreed to meet the next evening at a nice Italian restaurant downtown. I hung up the phone and just sat there, grinning like an idiot. After everything I'd been through, after all the pain and betrayal, something good was finally happening.
That first dinner was amazing. Sarah showed up wearing a red dress instead of one of her professional suits, her hair down instead of pulled back, and she looked absolutely stunning. But what struck me most was how different she was outside the context of lawyer and client. She was funny, really funny. She told me stories about crazy cases she'd worked on, about her family, about how she'd almost become a chef instead of a lawyer because she loved cooking so much. "Wait," I said, laughing, "you're telling me that the shark almost became a chef?" She laughed, and the sound was like music. "Don't tell anyone. It would ruin my reputation." We talked for hours. The restaurant eventually had to politely suggest that they were closing, and we'd been there for 4 hours without even noticing. I walked her to her car, and when we got there, we both kind of stood awkwardly for a moment. "I had a really great time tonight," Sarah said. "Me too," I replied. "Can we do this again?" "I'd like that." We dated for 6 months before I knew with absolute certainty that she was the one. Sarah was everything Jessica wasn't. She was genuine, where Jessica had been manipulative. She was supportive, where Jessica had been self-centered. She was honest, where Jessica had been deceitful. With Sarah, I never had to wonder where I stood. She told me exactly how she felt, what she wanted, what she needed. There were no games, no hidden agendas, no lies. She met my family, except David, obviously, and they loved her. My mom actually cried and said, "This is who you were meant to be with all along." Sarah introduced me to her family, her parents, her younger sister, and they welcomed me with open arms. Her dad, a retired judge, shook my hand and said, "My daughter doesn't bring just anyone home. You must be special." We traveled together, cooked together, built a life together. And through it all, Sarah continued to amaze me with her intelligence, her kindness, her strength, and her unwavering support. It was almost exactly a year after our first date when I decided to propose. I planned everything carefully. I took Sarah back to the Italian restaurant where we'd had our first date. I'd called ahead and arranged for the same table, and I had hidden a photographer outside to capture the moment. We had a wonderful dinner.
reminiscing about the past year and making plans for the future, and when dessert came, I reached across the table and took her hand. "Sarah," I said, "a year ago, my life was falling apart. I'd lost my wife, my brother, my trust in people. I thought I'd never be happy again." She squeezed my hand, her eyes already glistening with tears because I think she knew what was coming. "But then I met you," I continued, "and you didn't just save me legally, you saved me completely. You showed me what real love looks like, what real partnership looks like, what it means to be with someone who sees you, understands you, and loves you exactly as you are." I got out of my chair and knelt down beside the table, pulling out the ring I'd been carrying in my pocket all night. "Sarah Mitchell, will you marry me?" She was crying now, full tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling the biggest smile I'd ever seen. "Yes," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Michael, I'll marry you." I slipped the ring on her finger, stood up, and kissed her while the entire restaurant erupted in applause. It was perfect. Sarah and I got married 6 months later, in a small ceremony with our closest friends and family. No drama, no betrayal, just love and joy, and the beginning of a beautiful future. Looking back now, 3 years after catching Jessica and David together, I can honestly say that their betrayal was the best thing that ever happened to me. I know that sounds crazy, and don't get me wrong, going through that pain was hell. There were days I didn't think I'd survive it. Days when the anger and hurt were so overwhelming that I couldn't function. But that betrayal led me to Sarah. It led me to real love, real partnership, and a happiness I never knew was possible. As for Jessica and David, last I heard, they're not together anymore. Turns out that relationships built on betrayal and lies don't tend to last. Who would have thought? I don't hate them anymore. I don't feel anything toward them anymore, honestly. They're just strangers who used to be in my life. Sarah is my life now. Sarah and the future we're building together. We just found out last month that Sarah's pregnant with our first child. We're expecting a daughter in 6 months, and we couldn't be more excited. Sometimes, when I'm lying in bed next to Sarah, feeling our daughter kick, I think about how different my life could have been if I'd never caught Jessica and David. I'd still be living in that false reality, married to someone who didn't love me, blind to the betrayal happening right under my nose. Instead, I'm here, with a woman who loves me fiercely and honestly, building a family based on trust and genuine affection. And I owe so much of that to Sarah, not just for being an incredible lawyer, but for being brave enough to call me that day and ask me to dinner, for taking a chance on something that could have been complicated and messy, but turned into something beautiful instead. If there's one thing I want you to take away from my story, it's this. Betrayal hurts. God, does it hurt. But it's not the end of your story. It's just a chapter. A painful, difficult chapter, but still just a chapter. The people who betray you aren't worth your energy, your anger, or your tears. They've already proven they're not worthy of a place in your life. But the right people, the ones who stand by you, who fight for you, who love you the way you deserve to be loved, they're out there. And sometimes they show up in the most unexpected ways. For me, it was a brilliant lawyer with a reputation for being ruthless in the courtroom, but who turned out to have the kindest heart I've ever known. So if you're going through something similar right now, I want you to know, it gets better. It really does. You will survive this. You will heal. And one day, you'll look back and realize that the worst thing that ever happened to you led you to the best thing that ever happened to you. Trust the process. Trust yourself. And never settle for anything less than you deserve. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it helps someone out there who needs to hear it. And to Sarah, if you're listening, I love you. Thank you for being my lawyer, my partner, and the love of my life. I can't wait to meet our daughter and start this next chapter together. Remember to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you, and drop a comment below sharing your thoughts or your own experiences. You're not alone. We're all in this together.